I come from a military family, so I've lived all over the country, often without the opportunity to have friends for long periods. I also have crazy social anxiety, so I'm pretty bad at making friends in general. This story began after I lived in rural Newfoundland for about 3 years at the age of 14. I have no friends, my home life is pretty awful, and I was very depressed at the time. I lived on about an acre of land, with a river separating us from about 1,000,000 acres of rural forest. I have no idea the size or how big it was. It had a bunch of quad tracks. It was a pretty spooky forest, and I have a ton of stories from there. Noteworthy are the Bear Trap Forest, a 40-foot swamp, a random abandoned suburb, and a house in the middle of nowhere. But those are stories for another time. So it was around the end of August. My parents told me that there had been screaming and yelling coming from our yard for weeks. They saw the flashlights and thought it was some kids just trying to break into our garage and steal beer or something. There were times when I heard it too, usually in the evening, just a couple of voices shouting intermittently, and often I heard a few voices talking just across the river in the woods. It's okay. There were a lot of kids hanging out in that forest, and with my debilitating social anxiety, I had no desire to talk to them. For weeks after that happened, I heard kids going about their normal business around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I decided, shit, I'm going to see what's so exciting about this. So I ventured into the woods and rode about 300 feet down the ATV trail my neighbor was riding, and I met one of them. I'm also going to use their names, as maybe that will give some context to someone out there. So the boy I met was called Jack. He was a year or two younger than me, about a foot shorter, I'd say, and wore really old clothes. He seemed surprised to meet me, but we said hello, and I said I had heard them for a while and came to see what was going on. Jack was overjoyed and insisted that I follow him to his friend's project. So I follow the guy and end up in an area that is pretty clearly carved out of a thick part of the forest. I knew the area, and I had often hung out in these woods alone and explored, but many of these things I saw were completely new. There were 2 other kids there, one my age named Elvis, and an older kid about 2 years named Louis. They said they were working on building a tree or fort and asked if I wanted to help. Of course I said yes because I had never been asked to hang out with anyone before, and they took me. Now I need to discuss these kids' outfits because it was amazing. When I say not in style, I mean a miserable early 80s fashion style. Neon colors, and one child had shoulder pads. Honestly, it was just a mess. Besides, they were wearing big rubber boots, and the kids looked, new, but as if they had no signs of pimples. Their hair was flawless, and their clothes were clean as hell, and I just assumed they had gifts from their parents or something. By the way, they also stated that they are all friends, not brothers. So these kids were good to me, and I mean really good. But I never really got to know them. They never wanted to talk about their home life or anything. But I guess it's not that surprising. Where I lived, and all we used axes, saws, ropes, and nails to make a pretty solid fort. It had about 8-foot walls made of birch. We made a table to sit at, a vantage point in the biggest tree we could find. The place was the size of a 1-bedroom apartment, and we were all proud of it. One day we were sitting at a table talking about our favorite trees or something. I asked Elvis why I had never seen him before. When he lived near me, he had to go to my school. It was one of 2 schools in my town, and there was no way he was living in the catchment area of the other. However, he insisted that he was, and wondered why we had never met. We didn't know the same classmates, the same people, we could barely agree on teachers, but still, I think, these kids were talking to me, and that was enough. So about 2 weeks after meeting them and building this fortress, I said I need to go home, get something to eat. I asked if they wanted some too, since it was basically my backyard and my parents always cooked too much and they just became hostile. Not for food, mind you, they just refused to cross the river. Louis categorically made up the story that swimming an unfamiliar river is bad luck, but I wasn't going to push the issue, so I asked if they wanted anything, and they said yes, and I brought a cake that we could all eat. They apologized for getting angry, said they were just super superstitious, and to be honest, I didn't think anything more of it. We spent the rest of the day, just planning to break into the woods and look for thick pines and whatnot. About a week later, I went to the fort and we did our thing. But today the kids looked grumpy, if that's the right word. Jack was also particularly bad. He looked like he'd just been hit hard in his life with 3 bouts of pneumonia or something. I asked if he was okay, and he said yes, it was just the flu, but they all looked very wet as well. Maybe greasy is a better word, but they had sickly hair, skin that was shiny and sticky, and clothes that looked awful. I wasn't shocked. I mean, these kids wore the same clothes every day. But so did a lot of really poor kids in the city, and they never looked like that. Well, we played for about an hour before they left, and Louis said he'd see me tomorrow, and Jack and Elvis left coughing like they smoked a pack a day. I told my parents about these kids, and they thought the kids were weird, but the friendless kid just found 3. Don't ask questions, okay? By the way, the night scream also stopped at this place. After that, we never saw flashlights again. So the next day, I returned with an axe and a bag of nails in my hand. For the plan was that we were going to give the insurgent a fresh look, and when I arrived at the fort, the place was just in ruins. The walls were destroyed, the table was in half, and maybe 1 or 2 pieces remained from the observation deck. The most notable thing was that everything was rotting like it had been sitting there for decades. The table was basically nothing, and I could see growth on what was supposed to be our floor, and it was a solid half of a tree. My only thought at the time was also, what the hell? And I rationalized that maybe someone had found our fortress and destroyed it or something, and so I was just waiting for the kids to come. And the next day, and the next day, and the day after that, and I waited a week, and I never saw those kids again. I was very depressed and eventually stopped waiting for them. I wanted to look for them, but they did not show me or tell me where they lived except on the mountain. My parents also noticed and asked why I wasn't hanging out with the kids anymore, and I told them what was going on. They brushed it off and just insisted that if they didn't want to be my friends, I didn't need them anyway, and I was sad for a while after that, but eventually I got over it. But fast forward to today, I'm 29 and I'm telling my wife about these kids I was messing with and the time we made a cool fort. I explain how they looked, how they acted. All in all, it's a pretty good memory with a sad ending, but my wife looks at me wide-eyed and just says, "You hung out with a bunch of creepy ghost kids." I think this is crazy, but she says, "Has anyone else seen them?" And I have to admit, no, they didn't. They saw the flashlight, but not the children. They heard them and heard about them, but no one looked at them except me. There were never any records that I could find of them either. No one else at the school they allegedly went to knew them. They never showed me their house or came into mine despite my insistence, and my wife said that these are pretty horrible things and I have to share them with you, and here I am. Regarding the previous story, I am a female, 18 years old. However, I was 13 years old when this meeting took place. This may be quite long, but bear with me. I promise it's good. So this meeting happened around 2013, and I was part of this all-girls group. We met every week and just hung out and did teenage things. There were different places in my town, and I obviously went to the one closest to me. It was about a 10-minute drive from my house, and the building where we met was a large local park by the lake, which made for a fun time. The group was for girls aged 13, 17, so overall we all got along well. The particular group I was in met on a Thursday night, and there were 9 of us. 2 were friends of my family who were also my best friends for life. They and 2 other girls, and I went to the same school. So this camp was every year, and the goal was to do everything by yourself. We got to set up our own campsite, cook all the dinners and stuff, and honestly, it was a lot of fun. I've been twice before, and it's a bit of a competition, and our group split into 2. Me, Erin, Izzy, and Jess. The other 5 girls were in another group, and one thing we do to get ready is go grocery shopping. So we did that one night, and the rest spent a few nights packing everything we would need, like tents and portable stoves, campfire items, and more. My friend Erin and I were in the same class at school, so we left camp early on Friday afternoon, and her mom picked us up. We live on the same street, so we took our things and went there with the other girls, Izzy and Jess. The park where all the camps were was quite large, and we stopped to eat pizzas on the way. The first few nights at camp went pretty well, and we stayed up all night, ate candy in our tent, sneaked out and walked around the huge park, talked, played truth or dare, and never, and you know, normal girl stuff, teenagers. On the last full day, we did the activity we had chosen before going to camp. Out of all the girls in my group, I was the only one who chose archery. and I only knew 2 girls from my main group, and I met some other girls that I didn't know from other groups. But during the event, the leaders just started behaving very strangely. They looked at each other, whispered, and talked on walkie-talkies. The girls I knew from our group at home who weren't part of my group at camp were also into archery, so I played with them, and we discussed why we thought the leaders were acting so weird. The leaders seemed to be getting more scared by the minute, and they called us all together and told us to go into one of the buildings because they were going to shut us down. I stuck with the girls while some other groups went inside. Everyone else from the other groups went to the building on the other side of the park, including the girls from my group at this camp. We stayed there talking to everyone for maybe an hour, I think, and we all talked about the camp, and then what we thought was going on. And one girl named Chloe said that the girl saw a naked man with a knife walking through the woods. And another girl named Monique said there was a gang in the woods who knew about this girl's camp and wanted to find someone to capture. Obviously, we were all in awe anyway. Then they offered us bathroom breaks, and we went into the bathrooms in groups of 4 with 2 supervisors accompanying us the entire time. There were also 2 police cars outside, and when I saw them, I felt very uneasy. We started talking to each other, but the supervisors took us to the restroom and told us to be quiet. When we went into the bathroom, they explained everything. So apparently a girl in the orientation group, her name was Pippa, spotted a naked man with a knife. So Chloe was right about that. We were told that everything would be fine and that the police were looking for him. Everyone's parents were called. The police finished the search, and when that was done, one of the policemen came into our building and said they got the guy, and we were all safe. We were led back to our campsite, and when I saw my friends from the other building in the tent, I hugged them, and they asked if I was okay, and I asked them the same. Luckily, no one was hurt, but Pippa's girlfriend, who saw the man, went home and was obviously badly hurt. We were supposed to cook our own campfire dinner that night, but to celebrate, the leaders ordered a bunch of pizza, soda, and fries to make us a big feast. That night we were all very frightened and did not get out of the tent as on previous nights, although the boy was arrested and we were all still in awe. The next year there was a girl in my class named Hannah. I found out that she was a member of the same women's club as me, but from a different place in my city. I got to know her a bit after she told me that, and I remembered the incident at the camp from last year, and she was actually at the camp too. She was in the orientation group that saw the guy and told me that he was indeed naked and had a knife. I guess he was probably on something, but it was still a terrible night. I was about 13 years old when my family went on their annual trip to Poland to visit my family. My mother and father came from a small rural village about 2-3 hours away from Warsaw. It is an idyllic little place surrounded by lush forest and wheat fields. Life there is different because everyone is very carefree and relaxed. Being the small place that it is, everyone knows each other because everyone basically lives on the same street. I built up a bit of a reputation there because I was known as an American who came in the summer, so every time we came, the whole village knew. To be honest, I liked the attention. All the kids wanted to play and the adults loved me. One of the townspeople I saw most often was Tomek. Tomek was a cheerful guy in his 20s who worked in a village deli. He always gave me extra meat whenever my grandparents sent me out to get food or offered to show me around the kitchen. I never took him up on the offer, though. The idea of watching my meat being made was too much for my 13-year-old mind. Although I didn't know at the time that Tomek had a reputation as something of a town lunatic. He was no stranger to the police or the villagers, as he was a petty thief. My grandparents told me when I was growing up that my grandfather caught him trying to open his barn door not once, but twice, and then excused himself when he was caught drunk and didn't know where he was. Despite this, I never had any reason to fear or avoid him. Now, the village had a tradition called Gra Adwagi, which translates to a bravery game that took place between the dates of our visits. On this day, village children were put into teams, and then they were given objects hidden in the forest or on the territory of the village. The event lasted all day, and the group that found the most items won a prize. The challenge of the game would be to try and get a golden object that would be in the forest and guarded by several adults armed with water sprayers, water guns, and more. The only way to get the gold item is to avoid being sprayed with water. If all members of the team were to suffer, the team would lose the chance to achieve this. My team consisted of 4 of my friends, Eva, Arek, Bartek, and Paul. Our strategy was to spread as many items around town as possible, then try our luck with a gold item when it gets darker, so it's harder to spot. We got a lot of items during the day and got a good sweat after racing with the other kids. Around 7 p.m. we got 12 items and were ready to try our luck with the gold item. We heard from other children that the adults were relentless, fiercely guarding the facility. Forest area? This was the destination, as the gold item was behind Arek's house. Therefore, he took the initiative in developing the plan. Our plan was that we were going to split into 2 teams. Arik, Eva, and Bartek had to attract the attention of the adults and drive them as far away as possible, while Paul and I sneak around and grab items. Feeling confident, we headed into the forest as the sun slipped from the sky. We walked along the dirt path for about 5 minutes, and then left it, following Arik as he moved through the brush with ease. He stopped us when we reached a thick bush. Putting a finger to his lips, he motioned for us to look through the cracks in the brush and see the adults. It was dark, so it was quite difficult to see who was actually guarding the items, but we could make out 4 figures huddled together and chatting quietly. Without hesitation, however, we moved on to our plan of action. Our 3 friends walked around and out of sight, only for us to hear their laughter and the voices of adults shouting to get them. Paul and I watched as the adults raced after our friends, leaving the area they were standing around. I remember looking around and about to jump out of the bushes when I felt Paul's hand on my shoulder and saw him screaming. "Hey, wait, maybe they're not all gone, just wait a little," he urged. We sat quietly, listening carefully for any sounds, and then it happened. The faintest sound of something moving on the other side of the clearing. We could not make out who or what it was, so we remained silent, peering through the barren bushes. But Paul saw it first. He pointed to what looked like a dark figure crouching behind the tree closest to the clearing. We watched as the figure moved from tree to tree, not taking a step behind, just watching. Just as I was about to suggest that one of us distract ourselves, we hear a howl and turn to see the other team approaching. Clearly happy that no one was where the gold object should have been, we watched this small group of 2 race across the clearing without picking anything up. I kept waiting for the adult to come out and spray the children, but the figure remained crouched, half visible behind the trees. One of the girls walked up to the spot, an adult, but she was busy looking up the tree, thinking to her partner that maybe the object had been placed on the branch. We watched as she began to pull herself up on the lowest branch, and I remember how my stomach dropped when suddenly we saw an adult jump out from behind a tree, grab her by the leg, and start dragging her into the darkness of the forest. Her partner ran away screaming, leaving Paul and I at a loss as to what to do. We watched in horror as the adult began to cover the girl's mouth, trying to silence her. Before either of us could do anything, Tomek suddenly ran out onto the path and lunged at the man. Paul rushed to help Tomek, and I ran back to call for help. By the time I got to the backyard, which was the destination for the end of the game, I was screaming uncontrollably in a jumble of words that it took me a few tries to get out, that I needed help. A large group of men rushed to the forest, and I hid in my mother's arms and waited for everyone to return safely. My friends Arik, Eva, and Bartek cautiously approached me and asked what happened and why Pavlo and I didn't come back. It turns out that after Eve, Bartek, and Arik distracted the adults and chased them away, the adults decided to run out of time to get the gold item. They figured everyone had a chance to try and get it, and didn't want kids wandering around the woods after dark. One of the adults had actually already pocketed the item as they herded our group back to the main courtyard. My team assumed we'd see there was nothing there and come back too, so they didn't look for us. When I recounted what happened, everyone in the yard listened to me with wide eyes. About 10 minutes passed, and we saw a group of men coming back. Paul walks alongside his father and the girl who was attacked in the arms of her supposed father. When they all came over, I asked Paul what happened. As the parents gathered and talked in hushed voices, Paul described to us how Tomek beat the boy to a bloody pulp, but let him escape when he turned away, surprised by the people who came to help. He also mentioned that several people were still looking for the guy in the woods. I then asked the rest of my friends why the girl's partner who ran away screaming didn't send help sooner. Everyone stared at me with blank faces, and a sudden realization hit me hard. The following events became just a blur. It's a mix of me running to my parents with friends and asking about the girl, the frenzy of people calling her name and begging her to come out, the whirlwind as everyone rushes to get their children inside, and the chaos of adults getting together to go search the woods again and call the police. And it's been 8 years, and she hasn't been found. Tomek was one of the main suspects believed to be involved in the kidnapping operation of the two men, but gave up when he saw too much attention was being given to the event. I'm not sure what happened to him, but I can't help but feel guilty that I didn't do anything to help any of these girls. I saw how the girl ran away. Pavel and I were actually the last to see her. And sometimes when I see a child with braided hair, I go back to that night, and I can still see her braids swirling around her as her figure disappears from view. Her name was Dorothy, and I hope she's alive. So the other day I shared a story about some strange children in the woods. It went pretty well. So I thought I'd share another story that happened to me. Just to remind you, I have a big forest behind my house, and I used to live in Newfoundland. It was simply wild, uncharted wilderness as far as the eye could see, and even far beyond. There were a series of ATV trails that wound their way through this forest for quite some distance. How people would often just go into the woods for the day, use them to have bush parties or elk hunts and all that. But after about 15 kilometers down one particular path, there is a raised section of gravel. No one is sure why it was there, but it was visited about once a month by people who often wanted to throw a party. For me, a teenager with almost no friends, the forest was practically the only friend I had. I knew these woods well. I knew where all the strange places were. I knew which paths to follow, and I knew when something changed. I went to them almost every day and often just walked for hours listening to music or just enjoying the dull hum of nature. So one day I went for a longer walk than usual, about 12 hours, and decided I wanted to go back to that gravel section. It had a decent view of the valley, and I knew a few good spots nearby where I could just relax and enjoy the scenery. It was a nice enough day with sunshine and summer in full swing, so I got out in the morning and walked. The way there was uneventful, and the forest was as it always was, and I thought nothing of it. It was about a 6-hour walk to the site, given the topography of the area, but I honestly didn't mind. I should also point out that there was nothing out of the ordinary about this whole trip to the gravel lot. I had water with me, some snacks. I wore a hat because I got sunburned thinking too much about the sun, sunscreen, and proper clothing, and I didn't see another person on this trail, which was to be expected considering where I was going. So after about 6 hours, I got to the gravel section around 4 p.m. I'd say the section is about 300 feet across, and it creates what is essentially a man-made cliff that looks out over the valley. In the middle of this lot is a house, an old box house that many Newfoundlanders used to have, a small 2-story building with an almost flat roof of a bright pastel yellow color. I should also make it clear that nobody builds them anymore. They kind of suck to live in, and the last batch was built maybe in the 70s. But here was this new-looking box house on this gravel lot with new windows and everything. Also, the road to get there could be generously described as a goat trail, with enough space for an ATV if you don't mind getting bumped into trees. There is simply no way that anyone would undertake the task of building a house here. But I must say that I was very confused when I saw this thing. I circled the house from a fairly wide berth and noticed that the door on the other side is wide open. So being the intrepid wilderness explorer and idiot that I am, I decided I'd drop by. It leads right into the kitchen, and the location just seemed wrong. The room, and indeed the whole house, I suppose, was decked out like it came straight out of the 50s. Everything in pastel colors, a table with a yellow tablecloth with flowers, an ancient wood-burning stove, an ancient kettle. Everything. The place also looked lived in and fairly new, The floor was spotless, and the only dirty thing was in the sink or a plate or something, and I was drawn to the stove, and for some reason I really liked the kettle. I took it in for a short time to look at it, and to my shock it was really warm. It feels like it was boiling recently, 5 minutes ago. I carefully place it back, quietly with my mouth under his nose, what the heck, and continue to explore. The kitchen now led into a small hallway with what I assume was a sitting room at the end and a staircase in the middle to go to the second floor. I could see in the living room a large wooden coffee table, an old-style sofa, and a lamp TV with rabbit ears in the corner. But somehow, I was immediately drawn upstairs, so instead of exploring the living room, I went there. The stairs were quite long, more than 30 steps, but in the end I reached it with a tense feeling. By this point, I had already pulled out my music and listened to any other sounds. The house was dead quiet, broken only by my creaking of the floorboards. I don't know what I was expecting, but this place looked residential. I wasn't going to call out to anyone or anything because it was hard enough for me to believe that this house even existed. Above, however, was just a wall. To my right were 2 doors quite far apart, in a corridor parallel to the stairs, and to my left were 2 doors very close together, with barely a corridor, more like a landing, parallel to the stairs. All the doors were locked and I was on high alert, but I decided to turn right and go through the first door. Inside the room were dozens of old, creepy Victorian dolls, in what I assumed was a little girl's room. There was a small bed and pink walls, a tiny half-sized nightstand. Luckily, the dolls didn't look at me because dolls just scared me, even on a good day. There was no girl to be seen in the small room, but then again the place looked awfully clean. The bed is made, the floors are kept, everything is in its place. I noticed an antique hand mirror on the dresser, probably one of those plastic things you get for little kids, and I said out loud, why not, thinking I'd take a look at it. Not a second later, I heard giggling at the door on the other side of the landing. It was one of those old brass and crystal handles, and I distinctly remember that fact. And to be honest, I've never been so scared in my life when I turned around and saw the door slightly ajar and clearly the presence of another person on the other side. I didn't feel good. I mean, this place felt kind of hostile from the moment I walked in. I felt he was 11th at the moment. As soon as I could move, I rushed into the corridor and jumped down the stairs. Lacking the grace of someone who can jump off the floor and be fine, I crashed into the wall, leaving a decent-sized, man-shaped hole in what I assume was drywall. I ran out the kitchen door as fast as I could, muttering no over and over as I started to book him out of the house. I quickly looked behind me to confirm what had happened, and yes, there was a house, and yes, I saw someone coming down the stairs. It only took me one look, but I made it to the woods and down the goat trail, and eventually, I just went home. I didn't care that it would probably take me a while, and there might or might not be someone behind me who might or might not have a gun. I just had to get out now. The adrenaline lasted about an hour after I got home, and after that, I immediately became nervous about almost everything and walked the rest of the way home in silence. My parents weren't there when I got home, but I wasn't having any of that. I just got into bed and fell asleep as fast as I could. The rest of the summer was uneventful, and towards the end I told myself I was going to go back to that gravel pit and go look at the house again. Maybe even apologize if I scared someone in a house I barely believed existed. But when I got back there was no sign of the house anywhere. No depressions in the ground, no wayward piece of wood, nothing. Just some old beer cans from a party someone may have had here recently. Being completely confused and a little scared, I just decided to leave the area alone. When school started, I told my classmates about it, but they thought it was just something I made up, maybe due to heat exhaustion or something. But I knew what I saw, and it was a strange house. Now, one of my classmates, a boy named Randy, said he was going to go over there to try to find the place when it was there on the weekend. I told him to go, but I wouldn't go there just in case. Randy reported on Monday that yes, he had seen the house. Same as I described, box style, painted pastel yellow with open kitchen door. When I asked if he was going inside, I believe he said not $1,000,000. When asked why, Randy said that when he went in there through the second floor window, he saw a little girl and said she was 5 or 6 years old. The location matched my understanding of where the little girl's room would be, and he said she just shook her head looking straight at him with wide eyes. Randy was a pretty good guy, and he was actually worried that this kid was in this abandoned house with no one to take care of her, so he went to the door to enter. When he looked inside, he saw a figure standing in the living room, and at that moment, he just got out of there as fast as he could. He stated that the energy is crazy, and that he has no intention of getting any more crazy. He didn't look back and he didn't care, he told me. A few more people climbed up to the gravel pit to find the house after that, but no one made it. They said it was just a gravel pit and I was a nervous idiot. Randy even backtracked and said he made it up to scare me, but I can see the fear in someone's eyes. Randy, he was legitimately scared, and honestly, I can't blame him. After I lived in Newfoundland, I went up this way a few more times and never saw this house again. It's just one of those things that I can't figure out, and it still haunts me to this day when I think about it. The feeling was so crazy. That's the only way I can describe it, and I haven't felt this kind of inner anger since, and honestly, nothing has even come close to it. I have lived through and seen dozens of other horrific events, but this was by far the most hostile feeling. I can safely say that I hope I never see this place again. A few years ago, I moved with my family before starting college. Unfortunately, it was far from the university I was accepted to, so I was trying to find accommodation to rent an apartment near my university. My dad helped me out and ran an ad on Craigslist. There was a nice house for rent and it was close to my university, so I decided to make an appointment to go and check this place out. I showed up in the afternoon, and unfortunately I was alone. My dad said I'm a grown-up and a big guy, so I shouldn't worry about meeting this person. This old man greeted me and then left. You will have to follow me to get to the rental house. I was confused by this and said that your ad said it was a house for rent. Why should I go anywhere else? He says this is my house. I'll walk you through what it looks like. At this point, I'm a little worried, but I followed him to another place anyway. I thought if things didn't look right, I would just leave, but we get there, and I noticed the house looks bad and it looked like there were people in it too. However, I didn't see any cars around, so it seemed very strange. He looks at me and says, "Don't you want to check it?" And I said, "I don't know. It's not what was in your ad, and it looks like there are other people out there, and he's telling me that other people are checking it out, and I can join them." But I found something strange about it all, and I told him I wasn't interested anymore. The place looked shabby from the outside, and there were people in the house. When he asked why I wasn't interested, I told him it was too far to travel to school and work, and he got very angry with me and accused me of wasting my time. I said I'm not one to advertise a house and then tell the person they're not what they seem. And he started looking nervously towards the house and asked if I was sure I didn't want to check it out. I told him no at that point and then just walked away. And he never contacted me again, thankfully. I'm not sure what his intentions were, but something about the whole situation felt very wrong to me. Maybe he was just trying to show me the house, but I didn't like that he lied about the house and that there were people in the other house. I'm not sure what's going on there, but I didn't really want to find out. I also didn't like how he kept looking at the house when he asked if I was sure I didn't want to check it out. It seemed very strange how he went from being mad at me to desperately wanting me to come inside. Back in January of 1995, while driving home on vacation, I experienced something straight out of a movie. I was getting ready to deploy to Gitmo for a joint task force mission, and the parents needed to care for the 2 kittens I had adopted a few months ago. The drive home usually took about 6-7 hours, but I didn't mind the drive. Anyone who has ever driven in Texas knows that you can drive for quite some time without seeing another car on the road. It's now around 9 p.m., and I'm about 15 minutes from Seymour, Texas, on the way to Dallas. The 2 cats settled on my back near the rear window for the most part and slept. And this is where the strange things began. So I noticed the headlights of another vehicle about 200 or so meters behind me and think nothing of it. After a few moments, the cats started making this moan over and over, and I decided they needed to go to the bathroom, so I stopped. So I'm in the middle of nowhere, and these 2 cats are freezing because it's January, waiting for them to do their thing. After about 5 minutes and a cigarette, I decided to put them back in the car and gave them some dry food. I start back down the road, and now 10 minutes have passed and I can see the headlights behind me again, maybe a little closer than before. Both cats jump up to the rear window and start making noise again, and then I realize that the car behind me has never passed me before while being stopped. I started to slow down to let the car pass, but after going over the hill, the headlights just disappeared and no cars would pass. I passed another town and stopped to stretch my legs. It would be around 10 p.m. and I wouldn't have much time left, and I would be headed back down the 2-lane interstate going about 65 to 70 miles per hour. Sure enough, about 10 minutes from town the lights came back on. However, this time I said go ahead and hit the gas. As I approached the bridge heading into a nearby town, I flew past a police car. Of course he turned around and flagged me down, and I pulled over and rolled down the window and showed him my driver's license, military ID, and badge. He asked me why I was in a hurry, but seemed distracted as he stood next to my car. He was looking at the sky, I think. However, I told him that someone had been following me for the past hour, and that no matter what I did, the car kept up with me. He let me off with a warning and told me to turn right at the flashing lights and drive through town. He said he would stop the next car to pass and check on them. He also mentioned that they have received numerous complaints from nearby residents about strange lights in the sky and strange sounds. I thanked him and did as he suggested and had no other problems for the rest of my trip home. If anyone else has had a similar experience, I'd love to hear about it because I'm honestly at a loss for words. This is an experience that happened to me when I was in high school, and to this day I still can't explain it. So when I was a sophomore in high school, I had a boyfriend who was 2 years ahead of me. He was ready to go to Marine Corps boot camp when he got out of school, and we definitely had a puppy crush, and he was my first serious boyfriend. The time came and he graduated. He was going to spend the summer with his father in California, and I was going to spend the summer with my father in Pennsylvania. At the end of the summer, he will go to basic training at MCRD San Diego. In the summer we talked, but we had a fight, and as a result we broke up. I honestly can't even remember what it was about, but we stopped talking for a while and he went to basic training, then infantry training, and then he was deployed to Iraq. He had been there for a few months and wrote me an email. I returned the email and we talked about it several times each week. One of the conversations was about us breaking up, and we ended up arguing about it again. After that, I stopped getting emails from him and thought he was just mad at me. It was my senior year, and I was going to do a project for my American government class on the Iraq War. I came across the victim's page and saw his picture. It was closer to the top because his last name starts with an A. I was shocked, and I completely lost it, especially when I saw that the day he died was the day after our last conversation. I couldn't believe no one had contacted me to tell me. I contacted his mother, and she told me that he got rid of everything that reminded him of me. He threw away the pieces of paper with my number and said she tried to find me but couldn't. I personally think that if she had tried harder, she could have. But then again, she was a grieving mother who had lost her son, and I was probably the last thing on her mind. I asked her how he died, and she told me that he was a gunner on top of a Humvee, and while on patrol, a group of insurgents tried to ram them off the road. The Humvee driver swerved and flipped the Humvee, and it landed right on top of my axe. Fast forward to months of grieving for him, and I'm drinking and using and crying and stuff, and one night I was at home with my mom. She and I had a fight, and I called my friend Tori and told her to come and get me so I could stay at her place for the night. She told me that she had gone to lunch with her parents, but she would call me when she was done. I left my phone on the charger upstairs because it was dying. I went back downstairs and talked to my mom, and we ended up watching a movie. I went upstairs after the movie and had 5 missed calls from Tori. I called her back and she said, "Hey Rob, another friend of ours with you?" I told her no, that it was just me, my mom, and my stepdad at work. And she said, "Someone answered your phone." I told her that was impossible because my phone was upstairs and it was just me and Mom. She got scared and screamed, "Oh my God, I was talking to a dead guy." I asked her what he said, and she said he answered the phone saying hello, and she asked if I was there, and he said I was busy. And she said she asked him to tell me she called, and he said dandy as in great and dandy. and it instantly gave me chills because my ex used to say that phrase a lot. I asked her if she was sure she called my phone, and she said she looked at the phone and it said connected. I hung up the phone, went through my calls, and sure enough, there was a recent call on my phone that lasted about 23 seconds. To this day, I just can't explain it. However, after that, there were a few instances where the thermostat near my room was turned all the way down and no one touched it, and my house was a new house. Anyway, I really wanted to share this with you guys, and if you have anything negative or rude to say, please just don't leave a comment. Just a positive attitude because it's a bit personal. 1. Any clarifications are welcome, and I'd love to hear from you guys. It was very traumatic for me, but it was never discussed again in my family. I talked to my mom about it last night and she still wasn't saying much, so I decided to share my thoughts with you all. When I was 13, I got a Dell desktop for school. The internet was pretty new to me in 2003. AOL and MySpace, Yahoo Messenger, AOL chats, 16, female, collie, anyone. Most of the time I visited AOL chat rooms. I was a shy, overweight kid back then. Shy to this day, but internet? I can be anyone on the internet. I could say anything, and it was amazing. I discovered so many things when I got online. And if I could be anyone, I could be someone else. And that's how I met a 27-year-old man. So one night I logged on. The sound of the AOL dial-up still makes me feel uneasy. I sat in my cold, dark kitchen. The computer was here so I could be followed. However, it was just me and my mom, and she was always working, so I was never watched. Also, she had no idea how to use a computer, so I just got away with it. I was bored, so I hopped on an AOL chat, lurked for a bit, then said 15 and female. I was actually 13, but saying I was 15 made me feel much more mature, and private messages are included. He said, "Hey, my name is Rob, where are you from?" And so it all began. I told him where I was from, that I was in high school, and it wasn't a lie. 7th to 12th grade at my school, and I said you, and he said 19, male, New York. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'm talking to an older guy, and boy was he cute. To be honest, I don't remember much. Maybe I turned it off, or maybe my memory is a little off, but I remember emails back and forth and the occasional phone call, and I remember finding out he was talking to another girl, and I wanted to break it off, but he begged and pleaded until I yielded. I was nervous. He never asked for a photo and never asked me for much, just emails back and forth, phone calls every day, but somehow he made me feel safe, made me feel wanted and cared for. One day, he was driving from New York to West Virginia. My mom worked near my house, so he parked about a quarter of a mile away and drove down the alley to enter my house. My girlfriend was with me when he showed up, but got scared when she saw him and ran out the back door. Maybe I should have taken the hint, but I was just standing on the back porch with my head down, his arms around me as he led me in, and it wasn't even 5 minutes after I was on the couch and I hadn't moved on. Then onward and even into my bedroom, and I won't go into the details of what happened next, but I'm pretty sure you get the idea. After that he left, but with instructions to get in the car after I got off the school bus, and we would go on a date. I had no idea where he was staying, and I lived very far out in the country, an hour away from the nearest hotel. But the next day, I'm going to school, and I'm on the bus for 45 minutes. But as soon as I get off in the school parking lot, I immediately get into his car. No one noticed, and no one said anything. We travel and never go on dates. He just finds different parking spots to use me. I notice a photo of another younger girl, age 15, 16, in the hood of his car. Question him. Believe me when he tells me it's his cousin. Trust me when I ask why his hair is falling out so much. Believe him when he tells me that I can't see his driver's license because he left it at the hotel. I believed him when he said he loved me. I was dropped at school, very sad that he is coming home, with a promise that he will call me. Again, it all seems very vague. I don't remember a lot of emotions from that time, but I remember that a few days later my mom said that she found out that I went to school with a man, that I would never see him again, and that was. I also remember sending the email. I remember the late-night phone call. And I also remember saying that I would just like to live with you. I also remember him offering to pick me up, and I remember saying, okay. A few days later, when he left again, I had doubts about leaving my mother behind. After all, I loved her and I thought it through. I wasn't thinking about anything in particular. I packed a few things in a suitcase, forgot all the underwear. It was one of my most vivid memories. I felt bad that he drove 8 hours to pick me up, so I left in the middle of the night, got in the car with him and his cousin, and he got in the back seat with me, and continued his journey with me while the cousin would drive, and then he would get back in the front seat. This happened several times between my house and his, and the drive took forever. I didn't have anything to drink when they were getting something. They were stopping to take a nap, and I tried to call my mom, but it was off on our phone. I was looking for something to drink, but I couldn't afford anything at the store, so I drank at a truck stop. A few hours later, we park a block from his house while he runs to get something. I'm sitting in the back seat, waking up from my sleep, when about 8 men and women in black suits surround the car and yell for us to get out with our hands up. My first thought was, shit, the first 10 minutes in New York and I've already been robbed. At this point, I'm horrified. I get out, and a man drags me to the curb while other officers force his cousin to the ground. All the while, they are asking my name and age, telling him to tell his cousin my age. They put me in a car without identification and take me to the NYPD. Past reporters, cameras, news trucks sneak into the back of the station where I see Rob in handcuffs for the last time, and for the lovelorn 14-year-old me, it was devastating. They take me to the room in question for hours. I was then taken to the hospital and then to a hotel where a nice lady took me to Taco Bell and stayed with me while I fell asleep. The next day, 2 FBI officers escort me home to the plane, where I get off and am met by cops, my mother, and a crowd of reporters. I later learned that when my mom was reported missing, the police didn't want to do much. I wasn't even photographed. She had his license plate and remembered seeing his car parked on the side of the road when they first met. She took notes because it was a non-government car, and thanks to her vigilance, I realized that this is the only reason I am alive today. The police said they would investigate, but that was not enough for my mother. She contacted a family friend, who in turn contacted the governor of West Virginia, who in turn got the police to look into it. After they checked the license plate, looked at the person and found out who he was, they then issued an Amber Alert stating that I was apparently in extreme danger. My cousin told my mom that he looked at Rob's rap sheet and it was a mile long, but he didn't tell my mom what was in there for fear of scaring her even more. I never went to court. I never went to any hearings, but I fell into a terrible depression. My friends' parents wouldn't let them spend time with me. People would spray paint my locker at school and I didn't have any friends, but most of all, I thought a man was in jail for loving me. When I found out that he got 10 years in prison, which he served every year, I was very excited. I was in and out of mental hospitals for many years, on many medications, and the psychiatrist never talked to me about anything. I had to process it all on my own, and my teenage years were better. I transferred schools, made best friends, graduated, but however, deep down I felt that I had caused a man to lose 10 years of his life. That is, until I was told he got out of jail. A couple of years after it came out, I contacted him on Facebook. I was about 24 or 25 at the time, and he told me that if I ever contacted him again, he would kill me and my mother, that he still knows where I live. I had no idea what he planned to do to me. My mother still says he sold me to a sex trafficker. I was told that he had other girls my age that he was also talking to. However, some good things eventually happened because of my kidnapping. Schools all over my state started internet safety classes. Kids were being taught about safety. Parents were being taught how to keep their kids safe. And this man wasn't taking other girls. I'm 29 now, happy and healthy. And honestly, I have no remorse that this guy spent so many years in prison. It happened yesterday. I recently started a new job and still don't know how to get home without GPS. I text my fiancée asking if she needs anything, and she asks me to head to the store to get a couple of things she needs for dinner. The GPS told me to take a different route than expected, and I thought, great. A new shortcut or way home is always nice and always appreciated. That's what turns me onto this abandoned dirt road. Okay, GPS, I wish I didn't die here, but I trust you anyway. I go further, and the road becomes thinner, and the width is now 1.5 cars. There are mostly no houses except maybe one every 1.5 miles. I feel like I'm being watched too, and I swear I can see some guy in the woods watching me. Eventually, I got to a sign that said, "Danger, enter at your own risk." This sign is another one that is harder to see, and it also faces the other way, and it shows that there are hunters in the area. Those who get hurt without proper equipment are to blame. Oh, great, I thought, can't wait to get shot. However, I keep going and the road is hard to drive on. It's really rough and only one car wide. Now, for a while, like I said, I thought I was being watched, but I'm not sure if I was just imagining it. But now I'm here looking at this guy on a quad with a gun on his back, just looking at me. He's barely visible, but definitely there. And he's been following me for maybe 2 miles now, stopping when I stop. And it was not my imagination at all. And okay, I'm going back fast, but you can't turn around on this road, and I'm stuck and the guy's just looking at me. I don't think he was going to help me in any way, and I ended up untying myself, and I barely ran off the road before turning around with what little space I could, and I ended up just booking it out of there. A mile or two down the road and I see a black SUV behind me. The windows are all tinted and he just follows me, and it does it for several kilometers. At no point was there another vehicle traveling in my direction, so I started speeding, 20 more, and I'm getting really nervous. I get to an area where I can stop and do so while I wait for the guy to pass. I can't see inside the car, but I can see a head turn to look at me. And after that, I got to the store a little faster than expected, but I felt like I had acquitted myself. Boy, that was one hell of a ride. So I was 11 years old, and at the time I was living in an apartment located on a street that was under construction. Needless to say, they plugged in frequently, and the power fluctuated quite a bit. As such, the streetlights often served no real purpose, especially in winter when the evening enveloped the pitch black. This is also relevant, so keep that in mind. As I recall, it was a weekend I was supposed to spend at a friend's house. For 11-year-old me, this was an exciting prospect, as I had been swamped with schoolwork all week. I was supposed to spend Friday night, I thought, sleeping in and spend all of Saturday at her bungalow, return home that evening. However, what made it even better was that her parents had an event they couldn't avoid, and therefore entrusted us to stay alone in their 2-story house for the entire 6 hours they were gone. Then the idea of spending a whole night alone with a friend was great. No distractions and a full 6 hours of games and movies on their huge TV. However, as it turned out, my friend had other ideas, so I got to her house a little before 8 p.m. It was already quite dark, and her parents were waiting for my arrival before telling us about emergency contacts, dinner and such. And they also reminded us to take their 4-year-old Labrador inside, as the weather wasn't kind to him either. The kennel had several loose panels that leaked when it rained. This is an important fact that should also be noted. After they left, we watched some cartoons, had dinner, and just relaxed in the living room playing cards. And that's when my friend Sid had the brilliant idea to explore a fenced-off piece of land a few hundred yards down the street she lived on. No construction was done there, so the small part of the area where there were no ruins was overgrown with plants and weeds. We brought the dog inside, put him on a long leash that allowed him to roam within reasonable limits, got the keys, and left the house for a short 10-minute drive. It must have been around 10 p.m. at this point. In retrospect, this is where we still had a chance to avoid this particular encounter. Being curious and brave 11-year-olds, we ventured anyway. But quite inconspicuously, we arrived and began to climb over the 2-meter wall. Fortunately for us, the wall was broken enough in places to make good holds to carry us through. Once inside, Sid suggested that we sit a few meters apart until one of us was too scared to do so. We turned to each other and walked backwards until there was enough light to see the general silhouette of the other person. After what seemed like a good 10 minutes, I saw a hunched-over Sid get up and start walking towards me. She seemed to walk rather fast and erratically, jumping over rocks and at a somewhat daring pace, even cutting herself with spikes in the process. She came up to me, and just as I was about to laugh and call her out for being scared, she told me to get up because she needed to feed Shaggy. I remember being very confused because her parents had already filled his bowl with food and he had water that he could manage when he was thirsty. But I saw her face, and let me tell you, I have never seen her so pale. She really looked like she saw a ghost or something. So without asking, I said, "Okay," and we went back over the wall, albeit tensely and rather quickly. The moment my feet hit the ground, I felt Sid grab my arm and just start running down the street. To put things into perspective, I had a bruise from her grabbing him for 2 weeks straight. So we ran like hell was chasing us, arrived at her house and entered through the fence gate of her yard. It was a tall metal gate with no bars, and she ordered me to unlock the front door while she locked the metal gate with different locks into the ground and 2 gates side by side. At this point I started to panic too, but we got inside the house and Sid started running around the house, locking and closing every possible window and door and pushing back the curtains. I was very confused as to why she was doing all this, and also the dog that was standing and following her while she was doing it. After about 10 minutes, she came back to the living room on the first floor and with a very frightened look, explained to me that she had done all this because, while we were sitting apart, she happened to look a few meters to my right and saw another human figure crouching. Bushes. She thought she was imagining it until it came close to where I was sitting and didn't seem to realize that my friend was watching them. She didn't want to scare me or the man, so she thought of feeding her dog as an excuse to get out of there without alerting the man who was still lying there. I was very shocked to hear this, and we hugged for a few minutes, choosing not to tell our parents, as they had strongly warned us not to go out of her territory. We didn't want this to be the last time we had fun alone together, so we looked out the window at the street, which seemed empty as far as we could see, and put it behind us, as excitement took over our minds again. I wish I could say that was the end, but what happened next has stayed with me to this day, and I fear this situation from now on. To give you an idea of the layout of her grounds, her house was surrounded on 2 sides by a lawn, and then the lawn was surrounded by a wall about 2.5 meters high. There was one entrance in the wall where the high metal gate I mentioned earlier was located. The house itself had windows around the entire perimeter, as well as 2 potential entrances. The first was the front door, and the second was the door to a small outbuilding next to the house, which was made of a clear metal similar to that which metal fences are made of, but stronger. This room had a metal door with a lock that could only be accessed from the inside, as well as a door that was on the wall that this space was attached to. However, this door only had a bolt and was also only made of light wood. So about an hour after this happened, we were upstairs in her air-conditioned room, playing games on her computer, and talking about all the things 11-year-olds talk about when we heard a dog barking downstairs. He growled and seemed to bark at random intervals. Mind you, her dog was a friendly Labrador, who rarely growled or barked aggressively. A friend followed the dog upstairs to her room, and after she returned, she informed me that the dog was standing by the front door barking at it, and that it took some effort to get him upstairs, as he kept trying to get back in there. We were very confused as this was unusual for him. Thinking that a stray dog might have attracted his attention, we decided to go onto the balcony attached to the room, which overlooked the front lawn and part of the street directly in front of the house. And instead of seeing, as we thought, a stray dog or cat, we looked down to see a man standing very still on his lawn and in front of the front door. In the limited light we could make out, there were heavy layers of dirty clothing and a head full of hair that looked very disheveled. The dog was with us on the balcony and whined for us to be let outside. We sat on her balcony, and just as we were about to discuss what we should do, we heard what sounded like the front door slamming, as if someone was trying to open it with a handle. We crawled downstairs only to realize that this man had come to the window next to the door and was trying to open it, and then we realized that he was trying to find the entrance to the house by going around the perimeter. Just as we were about to crawl back upstairs, my friend grabbed me again and told me in a low voice that she had forgotten to close the base door in her haste to. We both looked at each other and blanched as we realized that this would allow an intruder to enter the house easily, as there was nothing but a deadbolt in the inner door. And at that moment, we heard the windows rattling behind the house, almost 3/4 of the way back to the front. The attached door space was a few meters from the front door, and we were lucky to have decided to go around the other side. She told me to wait by the inner door with the dog while she went outside and locked the middle door. She then told me to lock the door as soon as she got back, and if she was caught, to let the dog outside and close the inner door as carefully as possible so as not to give herself away. Frankly, we were both horrified, and since we didn't have time to argue about it, I stood guard at the inner door while she went to the outer door, fumbled for the lock, and went back inside, practically running as quietly as she could. We closed the inner door and immediately heard the outer door slam. If she didn't leave right away, there was a good chance we'd have no choice but to hide in her house if he found his way. After he tried to open all the doors and windows, which took some time as he did it quite carefully and forcefully, we went back upstairs and went back to her balcony to see if he had left as we were standing nearby. The foot of her stairs for a while, listening to what came next. Activity. When we looked down, we saw him again standing on the lawn in front of the facade, but this time we could see that his head was thrown back and he seemed to be looking straight at us. However, we knew it was too dark for him to notice us because along with closing all the windows, etc., we turned off the lights in her room and also drew the curtains to don't let her little light from the bedside lamp escape the blinds. And then he just started giggling in the stillness of the night and started crawling on all fours on the front lawn as his laughter grew louder. In retrospect, we should have called the authorities a long time ago at this point, but being scared 11-year-olds, we didn't want to get in trouble for not even being able to follow simple instructions. He also did this for nearly half an hour, only to face the street again, and then climb to the top of the booth in the corner, climb the wall, and jump down. We were still standing on her balcony waiting to see if he would come back, but an hour or so passed and he didn't, and that was the last we saw of him all night until about 2 a.m. and her parents returned. The next morning, We are very confused as to why all the doors and windows were closed on such a pleasant night, and why there was dirt on the front door handle. We said we just wanted to play in the dark at home, lying about the reality of the situation, and to this day, I don't think the man was ever caught. This happened to my father when he was a teenager. For those of you who don't know Clifford Olson, he was a Canadian serial killer in the early 80s who preyed on children and teenagers. His wife was given $100,000 in exchange for telling the police where his victims' bodies were, and he even earned an old age pension and disability benefits while in prison. I'm telling you guys how much you should hate him. In any case, before his arrest, he was quite well known in the community and a friend of the family, despite the fact that people thought he was a bit out of place. My dad knew it and had ridden it before, but until today something was very off. Clifford pulled up next to him on his way home and offered a ride as usual, but something in my father's soul just screamed no. He told Clifford that it was a beautiful day and he wanted to go for a walk, but the boy was very adamant and would not refuse. He finally agreed and offered my father a bottle of Coke, saying that it was hot outside so he should cool down. My dad almost agreed, but then he noticed the cap was already off and back on, so he told him he wasn't thirsty. Clifford gave it up pretty easily, but then asked again if he was sure he didn't want to go. My dad said no. The feeling in his gut was still screaming for him to run, and finally Clifford shrugged and said, "Your loss," and drove off. Not long after, one of his cousins went missing and was a victim of Clifford Olson. I really think if my father hadn't listened to his gut that day, I wouldn't be here because I'm sure he was the next target. So this happened to me today, and I felt it was something I had to share here to warn others. So I live in a small town just outside of Edmonton, and recently there has been a string of armed robberies in and around the area. This made me wary of walking alone at night, so I found myself at home at night more often than usual. It's not the worst, but I don't like that feeling of anxiety. But I manage and manage. So today, my dad and his girlfriend were invited to a party, so I had the whole house to myself. I pretty much planned the evening, watched some episodes of my favorite soap opera, and then switched it to classic horror movies. So I said goodbye to them when they left and quickly booted up the TV. Shortly after I started the horror movie, I heard a knock on the door. It was no ordinary knock either. If my TV had been louder, I probably wouldn't have heard it. At first, thinking it was no big deal, I went to the door without pausing the movie, just to make sure no one was there. But to my surprise, there was someone at the door. I opened the door, and there is a thin man. He looked about 30, and that's about all I can say about him. I'm not the best when it comes to describing people, and I didn't go out of my way to analyze him at that point. I can't tell if his jacket was gray or black or whatever. The man said he represents a security firm and travels around my area to offer his company's services. He asked if the owner was home, to which I told him no, and that he wouldn't be home until late. He then proceeded to give me a brief overview of his company, that it was the only one that was funded locally, that it was already being used by several houses on my street, and that it is convenient for smart devices. He even showed me a laminated sheet of paper that displayed all the different devices that could work with the security system. I told him that we were not interested in the security system at this time. He went on to ask me when my family leaves the house for long trips, which would be a great reason to get this security system. However, looking back now, that was a huge red flag. But I honestly answered that the house was almost never empty, and that we really never went on trips. I also added that he could speak to my father tomorrow when he returned. He told me that his team would be leaving for another city tomorrow, thanked me for his time, and left. I went back to my movie and almost forgot about the visitor. The movie ends, and I decide to check my Facebook to look at the buys and sales. There's a shared post at the top of my feed that also immediately caught my attention, and what I read next made me absolutely freeze. It was from a woman who was also talking to a representative of the very security company I was promoting, and this guy I must have quietly knocked on her door as well, which immediately caught my attention. She pointed out that the guy never put his name on a business card or anything like that, which I had no idea happened to me until I remembered. All in all, she was very suspicious of this guy, so she asked him if he waited outside, and when she got a pen and paper to write down his phone number, when she returned, he was gone, and thank God we never saw him again.